All right, good morning. I'd like to call to order the February 13th, 2024 meeting of the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Supervisor Capps?
Here.
Supervisor Hartman?
Here.
Supervisor Nelson?
Here.
Supervisor Williams?
Here.
And Chair Lavanino.
Here. Please rise and join the board in pledging allegiance to the flag. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time, I'd like to pass the mic to Supervisor Laura Capps.
Thank you, Chair Lavanino. I just wanted to take a brief moment to pay tribute to a wonderful, renowned artist who has just passed away, Chris Potter. Thousands of people like myself are in shock and sadness over the loss of such a man who inspired awe and wonderment about the natural wonders around us, our landscapes, our seascapes all across Santa Barbara County for so many years. And he was a family man. And what I loved most about Chris Potter was you'd see him at Hendry's Beach with his paints and just this big smile. He gave back to the community. He donated paintings to so many good causes. And his passing this last week is a real sadness for us all. And I just wanted to pay tribute. Thank you.
Very nice. Supervisor Williams.
Well, I wasn't planning on saying anything, but Chris and I went to high school together, and he was just a really beautiful human being. I got a chance to hang out with him just a couple months ago at one of his little shows at his gallery, and then this summer he introduced Yash, my 8-year-old, to painting because we stumbled upon him and his guy crew out in the San Rafael wilderness while we were backpacking out the Lower Manzana Trail in the 3rd District, he was just such warm-hearted, seemed to not collapse in the despair of his space, and I will miss him.
Thank you for that. Okay, this time we're going to take the next item of business, which will be the approval of the minutes from the February 6, 2024 meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
Moved by Supervisor Hartman, seconded by Supervisor Nelson. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next item of business is the County Executive Officer's Report.
Chair Lavanino and board members, I don't have a report, but I know that Supervisor Hartman wanted to acknowledge someone who works closely with our General Services Department who did some outstanding work. So Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you. I'd like to highlight the heroic efforts of Lou Gibelasco, a contracted project manager with the General Services Department, for overseeing the repair and expansion of the septic system at the Bridge House homeless shelter outside the city of Lompoc. Lou oversaw a team of engineers and construction workers who worked tirelessly in December to repair the failing septic system for guests at the Bridge House. The project required an entire new leach field, septic tank, and the relocation of infrastructure, and the system was fully repaired and expanded just before the Christmas holidays. As a result of Lou's efforts, the shelter has been able to operate at full capacity. So thank you, Lou, for your efforts. They will greatly increase the quality of life for the unhoused population in the Lompoc Valley. We really appreciate it.
And I add thank you to General Services. They've been working on this project for a long time, so we appreciate your work.
All right, that takes us to our clerk announcements. Madam Clerk, are there any announcements or changes to our agenda today?
Chair Lavanino and members of the board, I do have a couple quick announcements this morning. We received a withdrawal request on Monday, February 12th from the district to withdraw administrative item number 1 from the agenda. Administrative item number 1 is sponsored by Supervisor Williams. It is a resolution in support of peace and respect for human rights in Ethiopia. This withdrawal request can be added to the balance of the administrative agenda. Additionally, we posted an addendum to the agenda on Friday, February 9th to add administrative item number 18 to the agenda. Administrative item number 18 is from County Council. It is to consider recommendations regarding an agreement for county council services for the Santa Barbara County Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO. This addendum has been posted and made available to the board and the public and can be added to the balance of the administrative agenda. Lastly, for the Board of Supervisors' methods of public participation and to provide public comment on general public comment or an item on the board's agenda, please see page 2 of the agenda. Individuals that would like to provide verbal public comment may do so via Zoom by registering in advance via the link available on page 2. If you have any questions, please contact the clerk of the board's office at area code 805-568-2240. Again, that's 805-568-2240. And that concludes my announcements for today.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. That takes us to our administrative agenda. Would any board members like to pull any items from the administrative agenda? I'll be pulling A6. Anybody else? Supervisor Nelson, 6, you got it? All good? All right, Madam Clerk, do any members of the public request to pull any items on the administrative agenda?
Chair Lavanino and members of the board, we have no requests to speak from the public on the administrative agenda.
Okay, I'd now like to entertain a motion to approve the balance of the administrative agenda except for item A6. And the motion will reflect the additions to the balance with the addendum of added A18 and the withdrawal of A1.
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Supervisor Hartman, seconded by Supervisor Williams. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. That takes us to, going to start with the resolutions, correct? That's how we're going to do this, right on. Okay, so that takes us to the resolution to be presented, which is administrative item number 2. Madam Clerk.
Chair Lavanino and members of the board, administrative item number 2 is sponsored by Supervisor Capps. It is to adopt a resolution proclaiming the month of February 2024 as Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month in Santa Barbara County. And joining us in person today, we have Christy Stillwell from the What is Love program. And if you can please come to the podium, and anyone else who'd like to join you. And I will go ahead and read the resolution. Whereas we recommit ourselves to building a future where all young people feel safe, protected, empowered, and deserving of relationships full of respect and kindness. And whereas more than 1 in 2 high school students in the United States report they have experienced physical, emotional, digital, or sexual violence from a dating partner, or most never ask for help. And whereas youth who experience relationship abuse have difficulty learning and feeling safe at school, experience higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts. And whereas relationship violence is not inevitable, prevention works. Since 2012, What is Love has worked to prevent relationship violence with their researched whole school restorative approach to building healthy relationships. And whereas What is Love provides tools to teach young people how to identify healthy relationships and safely leave abusive ones. And whereas What is Love works with schools, parents, mental health providers, and partner organizations to prevent relationship violence before the crisis and equip survivors with the resource and care they need to heal. And whereas the independent evaluation conducted by UC Santa Barbara for What is Love reveals improved capability in recognizing abusive behaviors, improved skills in maintaining healthy relationships, and an increase in access to mental health support. Now, therefore, be it hereby ordered and resolved that this Board of Supervisors recognizes and celebrates the month of February 2024 as Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month and encourages young people, schools, parents, and our greater community to raise your voices, spread awareness, and actively advocate for relationship education. Our young people deserve a future where healthy, thriving relationships are the norm, not the exception. Passed and adopted today.
Good morning, Chair, Supervisors, Supervisor Capps, thank you so much. Feel very honored, and I thank you for elevating this issue a day before Valentine's Day, where unfortunately we see a big spike in relationship violence that happens across our county. 1 in 2 of our young people are experiencing physical, digital, emotional, or sexual violence every single day in our county, and it's preventable. So with this resolution, this helps elevate this issue, helps community to understand, and hopefully start talking about something that's uncomfortable to talk about, but we have to talk about it. We have to invest in it and invest in our young people. So thank you very much. I invited Grace to come today to talk a little bit more about why this is so important to this generation. Grace?
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm currently a UCSB student. I'm a third year, and in my free time, I volunteer for Domestic Violence Solutions and What is Love. I volunteer for these organizations because I think dating violence and domestic violence are really serious problems that affect not only adults, but teens. Personally, I've had some of my friends struggle with these awful relationships because they just don't know that it's abuse, because they think it's just, not just, but they think it's physical or sexual only, when in reality it can be very emotionally based. At a time when teens are facing already high emotions and hormones, they're more susceptible to abusive relationships because they're willing to accept love they think is that might be unhealthy because they just want to be accepted and loved by everyone else. That's why teaching our generation is so vital, because stopping these problems before they arise is the best solution.
Thank you, Grace. That was awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll now take up our administrative items pulled in order. Madam Clerk, I guess we only have one. That's administrative item number 6. Please read it into the record.
Chair Levanino and members of the board, administrative item number 6 is from the County Executive Office. It is to consider recommendations regarding appointments to the Retirement Board of the Santa Barbara County Employees Retirement System.
Thank you. Supervisor Nelson.
Yes, I pulled this item because when I first saw it, there was a little reaction that I had that we were going to be appointing new members while we had 2 members that had applied. But, you know, I've been able to reach out a little bit and understand a little that turnover is sometimes good in an organization like this. I also understand Trent Benedetti, who's been a North County member for the last 2 terms, was putting his hat in there if it was needed, but was okay with if there's some good qualified people, which is very apparent that we have 2 excellent, well-qualified representatives that have been willing to step up and serve. So I'm happy to support this. I do want to just put a word out there for geographic diversity. You know, we're losing a North County representative. I know that anybody in the South Coast can make good financial decisions just like the North County, but it is sometimes good to have voices up in the North that are in the different circles. And in our county, sometimes we can be South Coast centric. And so having, you know, representatives or people that are actually living in either the San Ynez Valley or in Lompoc or in Santa Maria sometimes adds a different flavor to it. I know that there are other things SB SERS is doing to address those issues, but I think we're going to have to look at that when Supervisor Lavanino eventually retires, that we need to make sure that there's a proper representation geographically moving forward up there. I know he does a great job, and I'm looking forward to supporting these 2 new members.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Hartman.
I had the privilege of serving with Chair Lavanino on the ad hoc committee interviewing the applicants, and we were really extraordinarily blessed to have some wonderful applicants. The 2 we did select, one brings Kern County experience and the other Ventura County experience. So we do have tremendous geographic representation even from outside our county, which I think will be extraordinary as well.
Thank you, Supervisor Hartman. And I would just like to chime in as well that this is always difficult whenever you're appointing individuals, especially when you have more applicants, which is very rare for us to have more applicants than there are open appointments. And I think both of us were very surprised at how high the quality was of the individuals who applied. I'm looking at it from a perspective of it's always good. It's a 9-member board with 2 alternates, and it's always good to bring in new ideas, fresh ideas, different looks at things. And so having 2 members, I don't think this has ever happened before where we had members that actually have experience in retirement systems outside of Santa Barbara County. And both came very highly recommended. I see our executive director of the SB SERS is here today, Greg Levin. Would you like to introduce Mr. Bianchi and Mr. Delgin?
Certainly, Chair Lavanino, thank you for the opportunity. We're joining our board for this term. We have Robert Bianchi, who's coming from Ventura County, has moved here to be closer to his family. His daughter has a young and growing family in the community, and so that's why he's decided to move up to Santa Barbara County. You have to be an elector of the county in order to serve on this board, so that's why that's important. I've spoken to my colleagues down in Ventura, and he comes highly recommended. I think he's still missed. He still gets invited to their Christmas parties, is what I understand, so that's a very good sign. And then we have Mr. Dodgen, who is recently joined our community. I know Dustin through a bunch of community organizations. His son plays baseball with Santa Barbara Pony Baseball, and he's also involved in AYSO as well. He's a local attorney, and he came to us from Kern County, and he was actually recommended when he moved into town. My colleague in Kern County also called and let me know that he was available. So when the spots became open, I let them know, and I'm pleased to be here today and look forward to working with them for the next 3 years.
Excellent. And do you mind just touching for a second, just touch on the geographic representation, maybe not of the makeup of the board, but what SB SERS is doing in North County?
Yeah, absolutely, sure, Levin. You know, we have 2 offices in Santa Barbara County. We have 1 office in Goleta that serves South County members, and then up in Santa Maria, we maintain a separate office. It's really important to be where our members are. North County and Santa Barbara is a growing employment base for the county. That's where a lot of new employees are adding, and so it's important that we're up there to meet them and create a situation where they can come in and access our services without having to take a half day off work. So we maintain a full office in Santa Maria, just about 2 blocks away from the Betteravia Center, with about 9 employees that some work remote, but a hotel in that office as well. And we're very active and involved. We have board meetings up in Santa Maria at least once a year, and we do a number of member events throughout the year at departments in Santa Maria in the Betteravia Center where this board meets. And so very committed to that part of the community.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Would either of the new members like to speak, or?
Thank you. Board members, Santa Barbara County, it's an honor, and I look forward to serving this beautiful county that we're in, and I thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Robert Bianchi.
Yes. Dustin.
Good morning, Dustin Dodge and Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to serve. As Mr. Chairman has mentioned, I've been on the Kern County Board of Trustees for a number of years, and it was a great experience and really an opportunity for me to give back to the community. So thank you again for that opportunity to do here in Santa Barbara. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. All right. So can I get a motion on A6, please?
So moved.
Moved by Supervisor Hartman. I'll second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. There you go. Thank you for being here. Okay, now it's the time for members of the public to speak on items that are not on today's agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any requests to speak on general public comment?
Chair Lavanino and members of the board, yes, we have 10 requests to speak on general public comment today.
Excellent. So each of our speakers will receive 3 minutes. Let's begin. Oh, and let's go ahead and close the roll on public comment. Thank you.
Chair Lavanino, members of the board, we will now go to James Silva here in Santa Barbara, to be followed by Chuck Williams. James?
Last week I presented evidence that Israel's founders knew genocide would be necessary to create a majority Jewish state in a majority Arab land. Lies would be necessary to justify it, and we have seen a lot of that in Israel's October 7 atrocity propaganda, including charges of mass rape. A month and a half after October 7, with public support slipping, Israel kicked off its mass rape campaign with a Jake Tapper CNN report. It featured Kokof Elkaya Levy, who in a talk at Harvard showed as evidence of rape, quote, an image of a woman stripped from the waist down, photographed on the side of the Nova Music Festival. But it was proved to actually be a picture from 2022 of a Kurdish woman fighter killed in Syria. CNN brought Elkaya Levy on as an expert in human rights law who formed a committee to collect evidence of Hamas mass rape. But they didn't tell anyone she was an Israeli government lawyer, justifying torture and writing their manual for force-feeding Palestinian prisoners on hunger strikes, protesting their perpetual imprisonment without trial. Or that she is the founder and director of the Devorah Institute, advising the Israeli Prime Minister's National Security Council, the equivalent of the CIA, or that she used to work for the IDF spokesperson's unit as a propagandist for the Israeli army. Most importantly, in her interview, she presents nothing but justifications for the lack of evidence and facts. A week later, this Haaretz interview appeared titled, "The Scope of Hamas's Campaign of Rape Against Israeli Women is Revealed, Testimony After Testimony." But within the article it states, quote, "Thus far the commission has not taken testimony directly." Typical evidence that is supposed to leave, quote, "no room for doubt," is a woman's voice from someone just identified as a woman on tape presented at an Israeli police press briefing. They bent someone over and I understood he was raping her and then he was passing her on to someone else. I saw him chop off her breast and then he was throwing it towards the road and they started playing with it. CNN and other media outlets purposely omitted the last part of the testimony. I saw one of them carrying a naked girl on his shoulder while the others were raising decapitated heads like in a kind of demonstration of power. First of all, this is unbelievable, but forensic evidence from such a bloody scene would be easy to collect by an independent party and would favor Israel. But they refuse to allow it and expect us to believe them without evidence as a justification for genocide. Well, I won't, and you shouldn't either. The same is true for the rest of the atrocity claims now having been disproved even on Israeli mainstream. A month or two ago, I sent an email to you with this information and more with links to my references. I welcome you contacting me for questions or discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now go to Chuck Williams, to be followed by Effie Benalis. Chuck?
Good morning, Chair Lavinino and Supervisors. I'm Chuck Williams from Old Town Orchid, and I'm here today representing as an alternate assemblyman for the state of New California. Count 8, election treason. The 2018 midterm elections, 2021 recall election, and the 2022 midterm elections were all lost in 1-to-1 balloting, but with the help of fraudulent electronic system and algorithm and the actions of globalist cartels and the CCP, a dictator was installed to oversee their province of California. Now with the help of the federal courts in the state of Georgia and their unwitting corrupted secretary, the state Brad Raffinger, the evidence is clear for the world to see how the selected treasonous governor of the province of California and thousands of down-ballot corrupt selected officials turned the once great state of California into a Nazi, communist, totalitarian providence. The election case pits an election integrity nonprofit and a handful of Georgia voters against the Secretary of State's office. They claim that the state's computerized voting system faces an unacceptable risk of being hacked and infringes on the constitutional rights of the voters. The case has already made history after Judge Tottenberg ordered the state in 2019 to replace its previous voting machines from Diebold election systems. Her ruling came after plaintiffs highlighted the touchscreen machines' vulnerability to being hacked. In response, Georgia bought the Dominion machines and began using them in June 2020 presidential election. With the Dominion machines, voters used a touchscreen, also called a ballot marking device, a BMD, to make their choices. Then they print out their ballots, which have a QR code that a scanner reads to record the tally of the votes. During the 6-year case, computer scientists serving as experts for the plaintiffs have uncovered multiple specific ways that both the current Dominion and the previous Diebold voting machines are vulnerable to hacking. Thank you for my time.
We will now go to Effie Benalis, to be followed by Rod Walters. Effie?
Yes, good morning. I was not planning to talk, just like Mr. Williams. And one of the things that I have noticed here is that you guys don't pay attention. You're on your phones, you're on your laptop, and I appreciate, Mr. Williams, that most of the time you do. You listen, you're there. But although I'm not a fan, but I appreciate your attention. And I hope you pay attention to this too. I received this, which is the official voter information guide. It is long and it talks about Proposition 1. Have you read the proposition? It is long, it is boring, it is sneaky, and it doesn't really go into should what we should do. We should help the veterans. Yes, we have to help the homeless, but there's a lot allocated for them already. On page number 10 says, and I hope I have enough time, and I'm shaking, to be honest with you. State bond cost estimate, amount $6.4 billion. Now, what is a bond? What is a billion? If you ask out there to your constituents that I have not seen you there, but just in places just taking pictures, that is not being with your constituent. It's talking to me, it's talking to everyone, and you don't. 6.4 billion, Prop 1, to be paid in 30 years, 310 million per year, time 30 years, 9.3 billion. And that doesn't include taxes. So it's between 10 and 12 billions. Who's going to pay for that? We are, us taxpayers, us law-abiding citizens. Your children, you have children. My children, my grandchildren, their children. This is not, and also what is a bond? Do you know what that is? Tell us. In your meeting said, this is a bond, this is the proposition, we are borrowing money from where? If I'm taking this information from here, someone said it's a credit card from Wall Street. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We are going to pay for it. You're not because you have a good salary, but we're not. And this is disgusting. And I hope this proposition doesn't pass. Espero que la gente vote no por esta proposición, porque no nos va a ayudar a nosotros. Y nunca se habla de los veteranos. Ellos son los verdaderos héroes. Muchos de ustedes no saben ni lo que es un veterano. Otros que se dicen ser veteranos nunca fueron a pelear por nosotros. So yo aquí les pido a la gente, voten no en esta proposición porque no nos va a ayudar. Y vamos a terminar. Yo ya no voy a vivir. Ustedes sí. Ustedes están jóvenes. Mis hijos también.
Ma'am, your time's up. Sorry.
But no on Prop 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We will now go to Rod Walters to be followed by Leanne Wolever. Rod?
I am deeply concerned about election integrity. Our nation's future depends on our ability to hold free and fair elections, where the will of the people is accurately and transparently reflected in the results. Sadly, there have been numerous instances of voter fraud and election irregularities in recent years, which have undermined the confidence of millions of Americans in the electoral process. I believe that it is essential to address these issues in order to maintain the legitimacy of our democracy and ensure that the voices of the American people are heard. I strongly believe that the use of the Dominion voting machines poses a significant threat to the integrity of our democratic process. Here are some of the reasons why I'm against their use. First, lack of transparency. Dominion voting machines are not transparent in their operation. The software and algorithms used are proprietary, making it difficult for citizens and election officials to verify the accuracy and the fairness of the voting process. Second, vulnerability to hacking. Dominion voting machines are susceptible to hacking and manipulation. The machines are connected to the internet, making them vulnerable to cyber attacks and interference from malicious actors. Third, inaccuracies. There have been numerous reports of inaccuracies and errors in the use of Dominion voting machines. These errors can lead to votes being miscounted or not counted at all, undermining the integrity of our election results. Fourth, lack of trust. The use of Dominion voting machines have eroded public trust in our democratic process. Many citizens are concerned about the potential for fraud and manipulation and are less likely to believe in the legitimacy of the election results. And threat to national security. The use of Dominion voting machines poses a threat to national security. Some of the machines are manufactured in China, raising concerns about potential for espionage and foreign interference in our elections.
The use of Dominion voting machines undermines the integrity and fairness of our democratic process. It is essential that we move away from these machines and return to more traditional and transparent approaches to voting. By doing so, we can restore public trust in our constitutional republic and protect the integrity of our elections. There are a number of measures that can be taken to improve election integrity, such as implementing voter ID laws, securing our voting system against cyber threats, and ensuring that the ballots are counted fairly and accurately. The key to protecting our democracy is to remain vigilant and demand accountability from our elected officials. We must hold them to the highest standards of integrity and transparency. We must be willing to speak out against any attempts to undermine our democratic institutions. Thank you.
We will now go to Leanne Woolliver, to be followed by Rosalie Hardwin. Leanne?
Good morning, Chairman and Board. My name's Leanne Woolliver. I'm the Senator of Santa Barbara County for this great state of New California. The significance of America being a constitutional republic is that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Any law, statute, code, regulation, rule, or policy made consistently with the enumerated powers of the Constitution are presumed valid. In contrast, any law, statute, code, regulation, rule, mandate, or policy which opposes and or violates the Constitution in any way whatsoever is unlawful, null, and void. No bureaucrat, politician, or person acting in an official government capacity has any legal authority to restrict the constitutional rights of any law-abiding citizen, nor alter the count of the citizen's vote. Do you agree? Also foundational to our constitutional republic is that the process of voting must be free, fair, and accurate. Do you agree? The 2020 presidential election and all elections since then were touted by the governments at all levels as free, fair, and most secure elections in history. Since November 2020, little by little, the evidence has come out as these elections were not free, nor fair, nor secure. For example, every county registrar in every county in the country represented that the voting machines were not connected to the internet. Since then, it has been universally admitted that the voting machines were connected to the internet, either by cable or Wi-Fi. While counties maintain a log of those who physically access the individual machines in person, there is no record of unauthorized access of the machines using Wi-Fi during non-business hours, nor while actually counting votes. Do you agree? One, since before the November 2020 elections, registrars of voters in each county nationwide represented the voting machines could not be and were not hacked. Did you or your registrar of voters in your county ever make such a representation to anyone at any time? If so, whom and when? Two, are you aware that in the federal district court in Georgia, there is a case named Curling versus Brad Raffensperger, 117 CV 102989 AT. Brad Raffensperger is the Secretary of State for Georgia. Are you aware that during the trial in the above-named case, University of Michigan professor Dr. J. Alex Halderman was able to hack an electronic voting machine with only a ballpoint pen and a card and alter the vote totals in open court?
Thank you. That is your time.
That's your time.
All right, thank you.
We will now go to Rosalie Hardwin, to be followed by Michael English. Rosalie?
Good morning. I just wanted to make you aware that a federal judge in Atlanta, Georgia, is poised to deliver a crucial ruling on the vulnerability of Georgia's Dominion voting machines to hacking and whether their usage violates voter constitutional rights. The outcome carries significant implications for the state's election procedures, as the 2024 presidential campaign proceeds, injecting fresh uncertainty and fueling debates over any county using these Dominion voting machines and tabulators. If this judge in Georgia rules with the plaintiff and determines the Dominion voting machines violate Georgia's constitutional law, this case will serve to have significant implications nationwide. Plaintiffs contend that the Dominion system poses a significant burden on voters and presents easy opportunities for fraud. In a courtroom demonstration, as I mentioned to you the last time I was here, Professor Alex Halderman executed a machine hack in under 5 minutes, overriding the machine coding and supporting and swapping the votes. This vividly illustrates the vulnerability of electronic voting systems, including Dominion, to virtually undetectable election tampering. Importantly, during the test, observers were only aware of the tampering because it was disclosed to them. On Election Day, malicious actors, whether in person or remotely, could potentially hack into these Dominion voting systems and alter election outcomes without detection, an issue that demands immediate attention and resolution. For far too long, the public has filed complaints and lawsuits when the election results seem extraordinarily inconsistent with polling or historic outcomes, yet they are burdened with providing evidence that is impossible to obtain because the suspected fraud can be committed without detection. Given the widespread lack of transparency, the absence of neutral third-party audits, and the unavailability of publicly displayed open-source election processes in our current election systems nationwide, the most viable solution is to reinstate conventional hand-count paper ballot, in-person voter ID, one-day election at local precinct level. We need to follow what Shasta County's model is doing for one-day hand-count paper ballots with voter ID, in-person voting at precinct level, where we get the final results on election night. Thank you.
We will now go to Michael English to be followed by Marcia Wirtz. Michael?
Thank you. 74% of European countries ban mail-in ballots for their citizens living in their countries. Why is this? It's because of massive fraud that has been seen when various countries allowed mail-in voting. France, one of the earliest adopters of mail-in voting, completely abandoned it in 1975. This is because of fraud. That's just Europe, right? Couldn't happen here in the United States. Not quite. The United States has a long history of vote buying, causing the states to move to secret ballots between 1888 and 1950. We can tell how pervasive vote buying was because the efforts led to a reduction in voter turnout by 8 to 12%, since people were no longer being paid to vote. Vote buying continues to thrive in recent times thanks to the use of mail-in ballots. In 2016, CBS Channel 2 in Los Angeles reported that 256 deceased people had voted year after year using mail-in ballots. In 2020, 4 men confessed to paying homeless people in Los Angeles for their votes on mail-in ballots, resulting in felony convictions. These are just a few examples of the sordid history of problems with mail-in ballots. We here in Santa Barbara are not immune to this kind of fraudulent activity. In fact, our recent elections show many characteristics of mail-in ballot manipulation. It's time for us to do away with mass remote voting and return to one-day, in-person, ID-verified, hand-counted elections. Such elections can be run more securely, transparently, and auditability, have same-day results, and cost a fraction of what it currently costs us to run elections. Many people raised the same concern to this board in the last session, prompting the board to ask if it was even responsible for such decisions. I have in my hand here a copy of the 2019 service agreement between Santa Barbara County and Dominion Voting Systems, valid through 2028, that effectively forms the backbone of our current election system. Note that it is signed and authorized by Steve Lavanino, the chair of the Board of Supervisors. Exhibit C in it details the costs, including $769,000 in one-time hardware and training expenses, and $80,000 in annual software license and hardware warranty expenses, total not to exceed $1,600,000. There is no longer any question that this board is responsible for funding our election system. The contract here does not require the board to continue funding this system through 2028, but it allows the termination of the contract with 30 days written notice simply for convenience. It would be in the board's—
Mr. English, that's your time.
Thank you.
We will now go to Marcia Wertz to be followed by Sherry Foster. Marcia?
Good morning, Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors and everyone else here today and everyone at home. Marcia Wertz, Santa Barbara County resident. I'm just continuing with count 8 of election treason. The solution, the plaintiffs argue, is to have voters mark paper ballots by hand, as nearly 70% of voters do in the rest of the country. The ballots themselves do not just a QR code, would then be scanned, and a procedure known as risk limiting audit would be used to verify the results. Georgia is one of a handful of states that uses the same election system for all of its registered voters statewide. That means that any problem, whether due to hacking or human error, could affect nearly 8 million votes. Many other states use a patchwork of systems. In June 2023, the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Georgia unsealed the so-called 96-page Halderman report. The security analysis of Georgia's image cast X-ballot marking devices, period. University of Michigan professor of computer science and engineering, J. Alex Halderman, and security researcher and assistant professor at Auburn University, Drew Stringall, collaborated on the report and demonstrated in court how Dominion machines are hacked and their tabulations are easily altered to select any individual for any office. In the Georgia courtroom on January 19, 2024, J. Alex Halderman demonstrated in explicit detail to the court and to the world how easy it is to hack into the Dominion voting systems and alter votes. Following an audit of the elections of 2018, 2021, 2022, utilizing data provided by each California county and the Secretary of State's office, it is obvious an algorithm was used to create weighted vote values in the Dominion and other vote tabulation devices by those who facilitated the selection of the governor. The evidence in the Georgia federal court presented by J. Alex Halderman overwhelmingly supports the use of an algorithm to facilitate the corrupt election of the governor. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now go to Sherry Foster to be followed by Lisa Sloan, who is our final speaker. Sherry?
Good morning, Chairman Lavanino and Board of Supervisors for Santa Barbara County. I'm Sherry Foster, Assemblyman for the great state of New California. This is a continuation of Senator Leanne Rollover's statement. So I'm going to start with number 4. Are you aware that the machines hacked by Dr. Halderman and the same type of voting machine used in this country? Number 5, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger had joint met with the California Secretary of State Shirley Ann Weber and the Register of Voters from all California counties. A, did you participate in any way in this meeting? B, are you willing to discuss with me exactly what was discussed in those meetings? Number 6, are there any memos and or emails that mention the meeting mentioned in number 5? What was discussed? What, if anything, was decided? Any task assigned or any plan of action? A, are you willing to disclose any such memos and email by the demand for information without order of any court? Number 7, are you aware in the federal and state laws there is something called racketeering, influenced, corrupt organizations, RICO? Are you aware that voters in this county generally, and me specifically, have been damaged by the collusion between Mr. Raffensperger, California Secretary of State Weber, and one or more register of voters concerning what we now know has a false narrative of the alleged integrity of the election from November 2020 to present? Now I'm continuing on with count 8 treason after Marcia Wirtz. The fraudulent election system does not function without the help and support of state and county employees who either knowingly or unwittingly have worked together to perpetrate the corrupt election system. It is also known that the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, had visited Nevada and contacted numerous California county clerks and state officials to support their actions to continue a false narrative to the citizens of New California State and California State that the election systems are all fine. We now know that Raffensperger, California County, and the state officials' narrative is a deliberate lie. The fraudulent California election system goes back 30 years. Let the most egregious era between 2018 through 2022 must be addressed. This will not be addressed by the current totalitarian communist government of California unless we, the people, act and demand the decertification of the 2018 through 2022 elections now.
Thank you. That is your time.
Thank you.
We will now go to Lisa Sloan, who is our final speaker on general public comment. Lisa?
Good morning, Chair Lavanino and honorable board members. On January 31, 2024, FBI Director Christopher Wray testified during a House Select Committee focusing on China on Capitol Hill. Director Wray warned Congress about a range of threats against the United States from Chinese hackers to heighten terrorist risks after the October 7th attack on Israel. Quote, Chinese hackers are positioning on American infrastructure in preparation to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities, if or when China decides the time has come to strike, Wray said. I found that the current contract with Dominion Voting Systems includes a provision for the vendor to provide a minimum of $2 million worth of cybersecurity liability insurance. It's in Exhibit D. In order to address this and other very real threats. For many decades, our county relied upon single-day hand counting of paper ballots with photo ID required. In Northern California, Shasta County Board of Supervisors voted to discontinue the use of their Dominion voting system machines and move to hand count paper ballot voting. The people of Shasta County had no confidence in their election system and elected a new board member based on this issue, which gave them the majority needed to make change to paper ballot hand counting. Since then, Governor Newsom signed into law AB 969 prohibiting the use of paper ballot hand counting, and thereby trampling upon the rights of all 58 County Board of Supervisors to decide how they run their elections. The clear question here is, why would Governor Newsom be so afraid of paper ballot hand counting to the degree that he had to make it illegal? For their part, Shasta County has decided not to submit to an unconstitutional law and is continuing with their plan to carry out elections without the use of any machines. There are hundreds of counties across the United States currently in the process of moving to paper ballot hand counting, and some counties have already transitioned. This nationwide grass movement is building momentum fast because the American people have lost confidence in our election systems. The use of Dominion voting system machines for which this board has authorized funding with universal mail-in, no photo ID proof of.
Ma'am.
Thank you. That
I'm
is your
sorry,
time.
that's your time.
Thank you.
And that concludes public comment.
Okay. Well, that closes public comment. So we generally don't give a back and forth with public comment, even though I would like to. I will, maybe in the future, we can put something on the agenda to discuss election security. So that takes us to departmental item number 1. Madam Clerk, can you please read that into the record?
Chair Levanino and members of the board, departmental item number 1 is from the Social Services Department. It is a hearing to consider recommendations regarding CalFresh program augmentation, and there is a 4/5 vote required on this item.
I don't think you're on yet.
It's on. Okay, thank you. We'll try that again.
Much better. All right.
Good morning, Chair Lavagnino and Supervisors. Social Services Director Daniel Nielsen is not here today because he has jury duty. I'm Maria Gardner. I'm the Assistant Director over the Economic Assistance and Employment Services Branch. With me today is Amy Kruger, Assistant Director over the Adult and Children's Services Branch. Rachel Littman, the Assistant Director over Administrative Services, and AJ Quinoveva, our Chief Financial Officer. We're here today to share some positive developments in our funding from the state for the CalFresh program, known at the federal level as SNAP, and to seek your approval for additional staffing that is supported by the new funding formula. We are also seeking your approval for a small number of staff in the Adult and Children's Services branch. For years, our funding in the CalFresh program has been constrained by policies adopted in the early 2000s, which only allowed for funding increases based on caseload growth and not for the increases occurring every year for staff salary and benefits and other costs of doing business. Over time, these policies have led us to a place where we are understaffed for the workload, which has a very real impact on our timelines of serving clients and our ability to meet state mandates regarding accuracy and timeliness. In 2013, when Director Nielsen joined DSS, he focused on improving our audit findings, and by 2016, we had 0 active CalFresh corrective action plans. That is no longer the case. Our current inadequate staffing levels have resulted in the need for us to develop a program improvement response as a result of a CalFresh management evaluation. Additionally, we have recently had to develop corrective action plans as a result of not meeting expectations on the timeliness of application processing of both our 3-day and 30-day applications. And of equal or greater importance is that delays in our processing of semi-annual reports and renewals can result in our clients having overpayments that they're responsible to pay, a determination made after time-consuming and labor-intensive hearings. As you can see from this chart, the caseload is projected to increase 69% from 2016 through the end of 2024, while staffing levels will have increased just 28% without the positions being requested today. The addition of the eligibility worker positions being requested would align staff growth with the caseload growth. We are before you today because AB 79, signed into law in 2019, mandated that the California Department of Social Services revise their annual funding methodology for the administration of the CalFresh program. The work on this effort was promptly put on hold by the pandemic, but in the fall of 2023, the new methodology was put forward. The result was $8.8 million in additional state and federal funding for the current budget year and ongoing. This funding requires a local match of 15%, which means that if new funding is fully utilized, the local match is $1.03 million. An important point of information about this new methodology is that the assumed costs of an eligibility worker have been updated from more than 20 years ago. And for the first time, the methodology recognizes our activities of processing applications, quality control efforts, and fair hearings, taking us beyond a much simpler calculation based just on the number of cases opened. Our request related to the new CalFresh funds is for 59 positions, 50 of which will be eligibility workers, leads, and supervisors. We are requesting 9 support staff for the additional organizational needs that the 50 eligibility staff will bring about. We are not adding any management positions. No, that's good. As I mentioned briefly in my introduction, we are also requesting to add 6 staff in the child welfare, adult protective services, in-home supportive services, and public authority areas. The funding sources for these positions include unanticipated growth in 2011 realignment, additional funding for IHSS and public authority administration, and the overhead cost shift away from these program areas due to staff being added to the CalFresh program area. We are also requested to add some unfunded positions to allow us to be nimble during the year. As you know, we don't have our state budget until after our county budget is adopted. We receive our social services program allocation letters from the state sometime in August, September, or October. The CalFresh allocation letter was received in November of this year. And the counties through CWDA usually go through a mid-year process of voluntarily redistributing unexpended funds in various program areas. These unfunded positions enhance flexibility and responsiveness to a changing fiscal and programmatic landscape throughout the year. They also create efficiencies during the recruitment, hiring, and training process. For the current fiscal year, we anticipate using $1.2 million in state and federal funds from the new allocation, requiring $189,000 in general fund, which we have available in our current year budget due to unanticipated 2011 realignment growth and salary savings. For the next fiscal year, the new positions will cost us $4.6 million in state and federal funds and $1.3 million in 2011 realignment and local funds. There is no need for any additional general fund contribution to support the addition of these positions now and moving forward. We are asking that you adopt the salary resolution adding these requested positions, approve the budget revision increasing our appropriations due to unanticipated revenue from the state for the administration of the CalFresh program, and find that this is not a project under CEQA. That concludes our presentation, and we are available if there are any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Supervisor Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Lavanito. My question comes with, as we expand these positions, what is our ability in the future to reduce these positions? I believe in the future with AI becoming an evolving technology, especially with service delivery, especially on these kind of administrative functions. I think that there's a huge efficiency that's going to be seen in this space. And so I know when we add positions and we want to reduce them, then there's things with some of our negotiating groups, our unions. So what is our flexibility in this? And do we have some of those, I don't know, fail-safes already built into it so that we can reduce those if those efficiencies are realized sooner than later?
Supervisor Nelson through the chair. In the eligibility series, we lose about 2 positions per pay period, and we do a hiring and training class every 3 months. So we would have the ability to, through attrition, accrue at least 2 vacancies per pay period, so 50 plus vacancies per year, and not conduct a training class at any time that we needed to hold that.
I guess my question is a little bit further, not just with the actual physical people, but actually eliminating positions tends to get some of our negotiating groups upset. So I'm just wanting to make, if we actually need to reduce positions, permanent positions on the books, FTEs, not actual physical bodies, because I understand that we do have that ability through just attrition probably to resolve the actual humans, but we do have these funding lines, and I know those can become issues with our negotiating groups. So again, I am okay with what we're doing here, but I don't want to put us in a position later on where we added and then we're going to have some issues retracting in the future. And so can you help me out a little bit more with that? And if we can't resolve that, maybe we look at doing this for a period of time and then renewing this in the future so that it's automatically pulls back and it needs to check in back on the board, so it's not a permanent increase as a policy.
CEO Miyasato.
Supervisor, through the chair, it's a good question. And with any of the, first of all, the board can reduce positions at your discretion through the budget. So the positions, any positions that are added by a department can be reduced in the budget. Regarding our unions, we have a layoff, a reduction in force process that is required by our MOUs with our labor groups, and we've followed it in the past, and that's procedurally what would happen. Would that cause difficulty? Yes, it's always difficult. Reduction in force is not something we take lightly, and it results in bumping. DSS has done a great job in the past of trying to find positions for people. If you recall, in 2017, we had, because of the very issue that Maria has pointed out, the state not keeping up to date with the costs of doing business in counties, we had to take major reductions. We had to reduce, I can't remember, over 100 positions, and DSS we had less than that out the door. I can't remember, 50 to 70 people who actually lost their jobs, but they did as good a job as trying to find placements for people. So one is the human side of trying to ensure people have secured jobs to the degree we can if we have a reduction in force. But your question about is there another way to do it? We have a prescribed way of doing it, and again, any position can be reduced through the budget at your board's discretion.
Well, I guess I'll just, if we go move forward with this, I think we should signal to our negotiating groups that we understand that we're adding positions and that is a benefit to the negotiating body, but to understand that we're doing it cautiously because we understand that there may be some changes here in the future and some efficiencies that we may have to look at reducing FTEs. So I just want to have that on the record. If we can go back to slide 10, I had another question there as well on the local funds. If you could go into a little bit more detail on what those local funds are. And I know you said no additional general fund, but what other funding sources are we pulling from there?
Supervisor, through the chair, I will defer to AJ Quinoveva for that answer.
Supervisor Nelson, through the chair. So the local funds is comprised primarily of general fund contribution, but we also have some small, a small portion is miscellaneous revenue, mostly welfare repayments that we do use to supplement our general fund contribution.
So the 1.29 has, I heard no general fund, but then I'm hearing general fund now.
Oh, sorry.
So the 1.29 is the number I'm looking at there in local funds. And I thought a part of the presentation it said there'd be no additional general fund, so we capped it at 189. For next year's budget.
Supervisor Nelson, through the chair, there will be no additional general fund needed. We aren't requesting any additional general fund. We're able to provide the local match using our current allocation.
Okay, and so with those other funds, I just want to make sure. I'm sorry, I just want to get it right in my head. So there's going to be approximately $200,000 in general fund as part of that 1.29 local funds and realignment. Where's the other 900,000 coming from?
The other 900,000 is within our existing general fund allocation. We receive approximately a little less than $11 million total annually in general fund contribution, which we use to provide local match for all of our programs. So the 1.29 million is from our general fund contribution from that total $11 million. So we, part of that, 11 million does fund that 1.29 million, and we have a very small share from welfare repayments.
So I'm gonna keep on this for a minute because I really, I'm a
So
guardian
it's
of
their old general fund. So they
Yeah,
get a general fund contribution, but it is within, so they're hiring all these new people with the money we already gave them.
Yeah. So typically with that general fund money that we've already given you, what are we taking away from? Because typically, we'd probably want those dollars back if you didn't need them previously. So if there's already some old general fund, that old general fund was being used somewhere for some other program. So are we supplanting another program?
Supervisor Nelson, through the chair. So we aren't supplanting the general fund. We do have other sources of funds to cover our local shares, such as 2011 realignment, 1991 realignment, and general fund contribution. We use all of that funding to cover our local share, which increases every year due to cost increases. And we also have other mandated programs, such as our cash assistance programs, which do vary based on need. So we use all of those sources of funding to keep up with our cost increases annually.
I'll ask it a different way because I think I know where you're trying to get, and we're not getting there. So there's a reason why we have an extra 1.29 million in your budget this year through some sort of savings, maybe salary savings, something, and we're trying to figure out where that's being identified at.
Chair Lavanito. So it's a combination of additional unanticipated growth in 2011 realignment, as well as the way that we've budgeted salary savings. Our department has historically had a 9% salary savings, and we've budgeted about 3%. So our department is trying to fine-tune the way that we budget salary savings so that we can afford more positions.
Okay. So generally, most of this is through salary savings, and I think Supervisor Nelson's point is that that would be great to, generally that comes back to us so that we make a determination during the budget of what we do with that excess money, but understand. Okay, thank you. Supervisor Hartman.
I just want assurance that the state, given its terrible budget situation, isn't going to try to claw this back in some way. We see that already with community benefit projects that were awarded in last year's budget. So how can you lay my anxieties to rest?
Supervisor Hartman through the chair. The first bit of good news is that the governor's January budget was revealed and there is no cut in there for CalFresh. So the new revised allocation methodology stands. We'll get another glimpse of that in May and then when the final budget is enacted.
So if we see some difference in the May revise, but we've already voted to do this, do we get to look at it again in our budget workshops or our final budget?
The supervisor through the chair. We would have an opportunity to revisit this at any time the board would want to do that. The CEO's office could request that, or we could bring that forward. We don't have the ability to fill all of these positions on day one. So training classes are about 25 in size. So even if we doubled that, it would take us at least 2 training classes, 2 training cycles, so a 6-month period of time to be able to onboard the eligibility positions alone. And so that should provide you some comfort that it isn't instantaneous.
Good question. Supervisor Capps.
Thank you. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit because I just appreciate the conversation and the attempt to try to right size the caseloads versus the workforce. And it goes without saying that nothing's more important than food in people's lives and healthy food. And I just appreciate the work that you all do in your department and all of those hundreds of people that are actually interfacing with people who need help. A lot of our community needs a lot of help, especially when it comes to feeding children. So I just wanted to ask you how this allocation of staff will help us achieve the goal that I know you share. We're at right now 71% participation of those eligible for CalFresh, which is slightly above the state average and a lot further than where we were about 8 or 9 years ago when we were just at 40%. So I commend the department for that tremendous gain, but clearly I know you want to be at 100%, as I am committed to. The state of Oregon is at 100%, the state of Washington is at 100%, Nevada is in the high 90s, Texas 85%. We have other great examples that don't fall on any sort of red-blue lines. So how, if you can just talk big picture, how does these new positions help us get to the goal that I know we share of 100% participation of those eligible, because that means we're missing, I believe you said, about 22,000 people who qualify for CalFresh, have hungry mouths at their table, but aren't getting it. So please help me understand how these positions will help.
Supervisor through the chair. Yes, that estimate is correct. The state of California, once each year, updates a figure called a program reach index. And the 2023 figure for Santa Barbara County is that 71.7% of those estimated to be potentially eligible for the CalFresh program are in fact enrolled in the program. Mm-hmm. That's about 13.5% of our county, about 1 in 7 individuals. But that number is not 100%.
Right.
And so it is estimated just under 23,000 people are potentially eligible and not yet on the program. And so how these funds would help, how the staff that these funds would allow us to hire would help, is that we wouldn't be scrambling to meet those deadlines of getting an application processed in 30 days or 3 days or a renewal done late. We would be ahead of those timelines, and we would actually be able to do proactive outreach strategies like, we haven't seen your renewal come in, it's due. And we could do things like that so that people aren't dropped off of the program for procedural errors and then making them come in and reapply. So those kinds of things would help us. Also, with our corrective action plans, it would help us be able to ensure more timeliness and accuracy of the program. But in general, if we aren't chasing our deadlines, then we're able to have some capacity to do extended outreach and go into the communities and make people aware of our program. 100% goal is very lofty. We may not reach that, but we need to be able to augment our staffing to be able to do more than we're doing today.
And thank you. I realize that staffing is a real challenge in this kind of work because the process is so cumbersome. I believe this is still correct that the form for CalFresh asks you so many questions, and your workers have to be trained on how to help people with those questions. In fact, one example is that it asks if you own a gravesite, because there is some income implications. So I just want to, we are in your department working, and my office working with Assemblymember Hart on trying to streamline the process so that it isn't so cumbersome for your workers to learn and be trained. Is it 3 months or 6 months?
Supervisor through the chair, it's a 3-month classroom training process and about another 3 months of on the job to become proficient or journey level in the programs. We do train staff in both CalFresh and Medi-Cal because there's a high degree of overlap in both of those programs.
Yeah, and I thank Assemblymember Hart, former supervisor, because getting that process shortening, I think this is sort of to Supervisor Nelson's questions, utilizing technology, making it so that this doesn't take hours and hours for eligibility workers who then get burned out, and it's hard. I understand it's hard to retain. We just did an event, a Tacos and Taxes event on the Earned Income Tax Credit, and some of the department's workers were there, and I was able to talk to them about how hard it is and how cumbersome and how frustrated people get on the other end of the phone who are just trying to access the benefits that they need, yet it's this very lengthy process. So the more we move in the direction of streamlining, I imagine will help with the staff retention, which I appreciate. My final question, which came into our office, was about the pandemic. You referenced the pandemic and how this was somewhat delayed because of the pandemic. Can you speak more generally about headlines we saw of food stamps being slashed that were benefits during the pandemic that are now gone? I know it's slightly tangential, but I was curious about this as well. Where are we now with the emergency food funds that were available? Where are they now?
So the emergency allotment, Supervisor through the chair, the emergency allotments that were part of the pandemic relief for the CalFresh recipients expired last February. And so that was on average about $180 per month for a household in Santa Barbara County of benefits that were gone. And so that definitely eroded their food purchasing power. In addition to the emergency allotments, there were programmatic procedural flexibilities that are about to expire at the end of March, including waiving an interview if the application's complete. And so that will have another impact for us for adding more work back.
A lot of challenges just to get food on the table. Thank you very much, Ms. Gardner and everybody else.
Supervisor Williams.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate you being introspective about caseloads and about both the welfare of the employees of the department and our clients. To ensure that both that aid that is needed comes to those in need. I also, hope as we staff up that there is also proactive outreach that can be achieved. That's one of the things that obviously goes out the window when there's not sufficient staffing. And proactive staffing has in the past been able to reach places differently, and your folks When I was in the state legislature, folks participated in the Franklin Service Center enthusiastically, and there is a location, I think, that we would like to have something like that replicated. And so I hope as staffing goes up that we can do more proactive outreach to communities that where some of those 23,000 people might be that are not on CalFresh but are eligible.
Supervisor Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Lavanino. Going to go back to slide 10 for a minute. I'm just trying to get myself to a place of where I can support this, but I'm still not quite there yet. And this question might be for the CEO. On the 1.3 million of the alignment funds or local funds, what's the flexibility of those funds? I mean, were those funds that if we did not spend them here, could they be used for things like jail medical or other public safety things that might, are typically used in realignment areas? I'm not against what you guys are proposing. It's just when we make a decision to allocate these funds, that means that we're not going to be doing something else. And the question is this the highest need? So I want to answer that question. The other question is, if we pull those 1.3 back, could you still do a partial expansion with the 4.6 million that you have from federal and state funds? So I guess that's where I'm trying to get to. Or do we need that 1.3 to be able to leverage the 4.6, which I understand is often part of the process as well? So walk me through this.
Supervisor Nelson, I'll have Nancy Anderson, who, as you know, was our former budget director, speak to that. But the short answer is the realignment revenue is restrictive, and the in the local funding, we are required to provide a match. So I appreciate the department, because when this came up, I had the same kind of questions, and as I said that I could not support this unless they were guaranteeing they would not require additional general fund contribution, which is what they've committed to. But I'll have Ms. Anderson speak to your other questions.
Yeah, Supervisor Nelson, through the chair, and CEO Miyasato somewhat explained the limitations on that. So the 2011 realignment is very specific to their program. The general fund contribution, so you're targeting that $11 million that is built into the budget annually. They haven't asked for an increase because what they're indicating is that they get enough growth, and typically we're not budgeting that growth. They determine what that's going to be and are able to utilize that in the middle of the year. So the focus of the general fund contribution, I think, of the $11 million that you're thinking potentially could be, in a sense, come back to the general fund. So they evaluate that every year. There's typically around 15%, it depends on the program, of obligation that the county has to calculate into what they budget. So they determine that. They have some flexibility, as their budget staff has indicated that they are not able to fill all of the positions, but we have to obligate our funds to that in order to receive the full amount of funding that they're trying to achieve. So some of that is is information that we're determining throughout the year, depending on what their vacancies are at. So it is a leverage. You mentioned that, and that's exactly right. But there is flexibility, and they've been very good about, as things come up that are a general fund covered need, to work with us and say, yeah, and look at those funds based on the availability and cover those costs for general fund funded programs and projects.
Okay. I guess the one question I want to get to specifically, though, is in realignment, are there buckets that are specifically for CalFresh? Or is that bucket wide enough that it could be pulling in things like some levels of public safety, like I said, jail medical, something that's on a lot of our minds. So how big is that?
Yeah, you know what? I would probably look to their staff to answer that, because there is some limitations, but I don't know about the flexibility on various program structure.
Supervisor Nelson, through the chair. So our 2011 realignment comes through the support services sub-account, which we use to fund foster care, adoptions, child welfare services, adult protective services. So that pot of funding is restricted to our social services programs.
Okay, well, that's helpful too, but that begs another question, because those are some other departments that, or other services that we hear a lot that have funding concerns as well. So again, we're up here, allocating funds, and that's, when we don't get to print our own money in the county, so we have to determine these things. These are finite decisions. I guess I have to trust the department. So you believe this is the best use of those funds, that there's not some other place in the department that these funds can be spent that might be a better source to receive better, or ultimately a greater benefit to your charge as a department.
Supervisor, through the chair, by increasing the number of staff in the CalFresh program, then that program picks up more of the overhead in the department, which is how we're able to add today, or asking to add today, the 6 positions in adult and children's services, because they're not now having to pick up that overhead. So it's a win across the department for being able to basically find change under the couch cushions for us. So we have a specific need here for the CalFresh program, and then we looked globally for what else we could make happen with this.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Carter.
All right, thank you very much. Two points I'd just like to make is that what Supervisor Hartman indicated for me is also very important, and that is as the state budget gets fleshed out a little bit more, I just want to remind colleagues and department heads that, it's imperative that we are not put in a position where we're attempting to backfill state and federal shortfalls with local dollars, our general fund. It makes so what I just want to make sure is that as the budget changes, as the state budget impacts become more clear, that your rollout, that you can come back to us and say, okay, there was some change. Now we're going to get shorted this amount of money, but we've only hired this amount of people. So let's keep that line of communication open. But I'm in full support here. And then I think the other item that was raised by Supervisor Nelson, which I think is a much broader discussion that we do need to talk about, is, because it's the first thing I thought of when I read this, is we've got to talk about at some point, what does technology and this new wave of AI bring to the county? We have a lot of positions that are clerical, and there's going to be a changing workforce world out there, and we just got to get out in front of that. So thank you for all of that. Good team presentation today. Are there any speakers from the public?
Chair Levanino, members of the board, we have no requests to speak on this item from the public.
Well, I'll accept a motion on A, B, and C.
So moved.
Moved by Supervisor Hartman.
Second.
Seconded by Supervisor Williams. Do we need a roll call? Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, can we please read departmental item number 2 into the record?
Chair Levanino and members of the board, departmental item number 2 is from the Planning and Development Department. It is a hearing to consider recommendations regarding ordinance amendments to the County Land Use and Development Code, LUDC, Montecito Land Use and Development Code, MLUDC, and Article 2, Coastal Zoning Ordinance, CZO, to comply with recent changes in state housing law. These changes include new regulations and development standards regarding the streamlined permitting of supportive housing and low-barrier navigation centers, the establishment or modification of objective design standards for applicable multi-unit and mixed-use housing projects, revisions to the standards and criteria related to state density bonus law provisions, and establishment or modification of standards for streamlined housing review.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As Ms. Alexander indicated, this is a good-sized package of ordinance amendments that bring us into compliance with state law. I have 3 members of the staff with me today: Lila Spring, one of our planners in long-range planning, Brianna Alamia, and who's also a planner, and then Alex Tuttle, our deputy director. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Spring and Ms. Alamia.
Thank you, Lisa.
Good morning, Chair Lavanino and members of the board. As Lisa stated, my name is Lila Spring. Excuse me. And I'm here with Brianna Alamia to present to you the Housing Bill Implementation Project Ordinance Amendments. In our presentation today, we will cover project background, the new and revised ordinance sections and chapters, policy and ordinance consistency, compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and staff recommendations. Now, to provide some background on why we are proposing these amendments, in recent years, the state legislature has passed a number of new state housing laws with the goal of increasing the supply of housing, particularly affordable housing and housing for special needs groups. The proposed ordinance amendments are required in order to comply with these new state laws. These laws are very prescriptive, with little room to modify provisions or text, but where the county does have some discretion to make changes, we have highlighted those options in this presentation. This project includes amendments to the 3 county zoning ordinances, the County Land Use and Development Code, or LUDC, which covers inland areas outside of Montecito, the Montecito Land Use and Development Code, or MLUDC, which covers inland areas of Montecito, and Article 2, the Coastal Zoning Ordinance, or CZO, which covers the coastal zone. The ordinance sections included in these amendments are the Density Bonus Program, supportive housing, multiple unit and mixed-use housing objective design standards, qualifying housing streamlined review, and low barrier navigation centers. The first of the proposed amendments are to the Density Bonus Program, which implements State Density Bonus Law. State Density Bonus Law encourages the production of affordable housing by providing for increases in the maximum allowed density of a specific parcel in exchange for some portion of the units being restricted to particular levels of affordability. State Density Bonus Law also provides for concessions or incentives related to development standards. Recent changes in state law include increased eligibility, including the addition of eligibility for moderate income units, increased size of the density bonuses, an increase in the maximum number of concessions, and modifications to required parking ratios. This brings us to one of the optional provisions. Affordable housing developed under state density bonus law has a required affordability period of 55 years before conversion to market rate. The county has the discretion to increase this period, and staff are proposing to increase the affordability period to 90 years. The reasons staff are proposing this increase are to maintain the inventory of affordable housing created through the density bonus program for a longer period of time, and to align with the goals, policies, and programs of the county's recently adopted housing element. Our next set of amendments are to supportive housing. Supportive housing is a type of permanent housing linked to supportive services for occupancy by target populations. Changes to the content of these sections are relevant to the addition of provisions for by right supportive housing in state law. These changes allow supportive housing by right, meaning ministerially, without a discretionary permit, as long as they meet certain requirements. In the inland area, this means projects would be allowed with a zoning clearance, which is not noticed or subject to appeal, and in the coastal zone, this would be a coastal development permit. Supportive housing that qualifies for ministerial permitting is only subject to objective development standards, including objective design standards, that are currently in effect in the inland area, and with the adoption of these amendments will go into effect in Montecito and the coastal zone. State law also sets specific deadlines for the review and approval of these projects. This brings us to another of our optional provisions. As the law is written, supportive housing processed by right can include up to 50 units. However, the county has the discretion to increase this maximum. Staff are proposing to allow up to 75 units in by right supportive housing projects. And the reasons we are proposing this are to increase the available housing for special needs groups and to align with the goals, policies, and programs of the recently adopted housing element. Our next set of amendments are to the multiple unit and mixed-use housing objective design standards. These objective design standards were developed in response to an increase in state legislation that only allows the application of established objective design standards. Objective meaning no personal or subjective judgment is required to implement the standards. The purpose of these standards is to provide the public and planners with clear objective criteria to evaluate multiple unit and mixed-use projects that will not be reviewed by a Board of Architectural Review or BAR. These objective design standards were developed and adopted into the zoning ordinance covering inland areas outside of Montecito in January of 2023. And since that time, staff worked with representatives from the 4 county boards of architectural review to refine the standards and apply them to the zoning ordinances covering inland Montecito and the coastal zone. I will now turn the presentation over to Brianna Alamia. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila. Now I will be talking about the zoning ordinance amendments to implement qualifying housing streamlined review. The passage of Senate Bill 35 implemented a streamlined application review process for qualifying multiple unit and mixed-use housing projects that contain at least 50% affordable units and are located on urban infill sites. These projects are statutorily exempt from CEQA, require ministerial review, and follow objective development and design standards. This ordinance applies if the county is making insufficient progress toward meeting its RHNA and is currently in effect. This chapter was developed and adopted into the Land Use Development Code in January of 2023. Staff is proposing minor revisions to the standards and applying them to the inland zoning ordinances, including the Montecito zoning ordinance. On January 1st, 2025, these state law requirements will go into effect in the coastal zone, at which time staff will propose coastal zoning ordinance amendments. The last set of proposed zoning ordinance amendments are low barrier navigation centers. Low barrier navigation centers, or LB&Cs, are service-enriched shelters serving as temporary housing, focused on moving people experiencing homelessness into permanent housing and connecting them to income, public benefits, and health services. Low barrier navigation centers apply in mixed-use zones and non-residential zones, permitting multiple family uses. The proposed ordinance establishes streamlined permit procedures and development standards for these shelters, which are only subject to ministerial review. The ordinance establishes application review timelines and is set to expire on January 1st, 2027, unless extended. I will now discuss the policy and ordinance consistency with the county's existing codes. The proposed ordinances implement mandated state laws and are consistent with the county's existing policies and ordinances. They're consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the recently adopted housing elements, goals, and policies. They're consistent with applicable community and area plans, existing land use designations, and the coastal land use plan. Projects in the coastal zone do not lessen the effect of and must be consistent with all applicable policies and provisions of the local coastal program. Now to discuss environmental review. The proposed zoning ordinance amendments are exempt from the provisions per CEQA guidelines section 15061B3, as there's no possibility of significant effect on the environment. No physical development is being proposed or approved as part of this project, but future development projects would be subject to individual review. The proposed coastal zoning ordinance amendments are further exempt per CEQA guidelines section 15265, which statutorily exempts local government activities involving the preparation and adoption of local coastal program amendments from environmental review. To conclude, staff recommends that the board take the following actions: make the required findings for approval, determine that the proposed ordinances are exempt from the provisions of CEQA, and finally, adopt case number 21 ORD1, 21 ORD2, and 21 ORD3. This concludes our presentation, and we're available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the board? Supervisor Capps.
Yeah, thank you. I was particularly interested in the change related to the low barrier navigation centers. I know how important those are. And this expiration of 2027, is that problematic for nonprofits and others who run these to plan? It seems kind of around the corner, so just curious if you can discuss that.
Supervisor Capps, through the chair. So obviously that's a state expiration date.
Sure.
I would not be surprised if it gets extended. I believe it's already been extended once.
Okay.
The idea with these is it's a temporary provision to try to address the significant need for homeless and sheltering homeless populations. It does allow for a streamlined review process, so projects that are already in the pipeline or conceptual would be able to get through the process before that expiration date without issue. And as I said, I think there's a decent chance the state could extend that deadline further.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Hartman.
I had a question about the 90-year extension. Is that can that be renewed in 90 years, or is that a absolute end date?
Supervisor Hartman through the chair. So the 90-year term should be set up so that it's renewed every time the unit transfers. And so essentially
it rolls.
It just rolls. Yeah.
Okay. And just so today is exempt from CEQA because it's policy, but we're actually implementing a policy that the state requires that exempts SB 35 projects from CEQA.
Correct.
So anyway,
Yeah,
it defies logic, but that's okay.
Supervisor Hartman through the chair. I would agree, but there are a number of things that we find with the state law that are interesting. I did want to add on to something Mr. Tuttle said. I believe, and we can work with council on this, if the state did not extend that low barrier navigation center requirement for streamlining, the county could opt to maintain our own streamlining provisions in our code.
Okay. Supervisor Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Levanino. I guess the first question is what happens if we don't support these changes today? It might be for council, actually.
Supervisor through the chair. These laws are already in effect statewide. So what we are doing today is trying to bring our code into compliance with existing state laws, with the goal of really trying to make it easier for planners like myself and in development review, as well as applicants, to understand the law and to read our code and know that it's reflective of the state law. So regardless of what we do today, these laws are in effect.
It's whether we absorb them or not, right? Whether we take credit as well. I mean, because otherwise it's just the state and we can continue to beat up Sacramento for some of these things, or whether we embrace them ourselves and adopt them.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, for the most part, these implement state law and they apply to us either way. So even if they're not in our code, our recommendation would be that the staff still apply them. So it just provides transparency. There are some changes though that are being proposed, and so that's at the discretion of your board. You're not required to adopt those changes, and you may want to go with just what the state law says.
That brings me to one of my other concerns, is I know when we started to make some of these changes on the ADUs, we eliminated something from the zoning code, the residential second unit. That was an issue there, which residential second units have other uses beyond what an ADU would have, the privileges. Are there anything that was eliminated through this process as well that might be limiting? Something we still need to fix, but.
Supervisor Nelson through the chair. Nothing was eliminated. It was more additive with these provisions.
Okay, so existing policies are still in place. So we didn't reduce like we did with the ADU, where we actually, in an effort to clean up, we actually threw out some existing uses.
Nothing like that was done as part of this effort.
Great, thank you. My next question was about the supportive services, and I want to understand that a little bit better, because I think that's that's going to impact all of us, and I think we need to be really thoughtful about that. It says wherever multifamily is permittable, that this could be done by right. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think if we could return the slide, we could have a slide up, and if we can return the screen to the slides, that would be helpful.
So yeah, going back to this, wherever we have, my understanding we're reading it, so by right, anywhere we allow multifamily.
Supervisor Nelson through the chair, that is correct.
So in any residential zone, because we allow multifamily in any residential zone with a permit, right? Whether it may be a CUP, but it's an allowable use. Would this now allow for supportive services in any residential zone?
So in multifamily residential zones, or where multifamily units are permitted, so not in single-family zones.
Right. Supervisor Nelson through the chair. So we're looking at not the E1, R1, E1, so R2, which is 2-unit development, design residential DR, PRD, and then our various commercial zones that allow for mixed use, because it's multifamily or mixed use are the zones where this could occur.
In any DR zoning, this would be allowed?
Correct.
And with supportive services, can we go through the list of what those things are? Because I've got a case study here in my community that I think we should be thinking about.
Yeah, Supervisor through the chair, the supportive services that are offered on site are generally things like case management, and there are some folks living in supportive services that can work, so it's help with job applications. It can be computer rooms with supportive services inside.
It also can be a facility for those suffering from schizophrenia, right?
Supervisor Nelson through the chair, I'm reluctant to confirm that, but there are people that do have mental health challenges that do live in supportive housing services, and then they have those kind of mental health supportive services on site for those individuals to help them stay on their medications or whatever else they need.
Yeah, so, and we need more of these supportive housing throughout the state and throughout our community, and I don't discount that, but it is sometimes the right place and right time, and make sure it goes through a process, and that's why by right versus having some local control over where some of these go are fairly important. I have a senior home in my community that's completely surrounded by residential in all directions for over a mile, right next to a school. It's a former senior home that they're looking at maybe potentially bringing in a facility where there would be people who are suffering from a non-lock facility from schizophrenia. And so, those are things that are, obviously those people need help, and we as a county have been very sympathetic, but I think my constituents would have some concerns about what that would mean in impact to their neighborhood. And so, signing up for that, guys, making that by right. So when, your constituents come to you and say, hey, why is this here? Why did I have no say over this? I think that would be something I'd want to have say over. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't think I can support this piece, at least at this point. Even if it's in state law, I would rather have somebody have to come and try to prove that up, that it's by right to do that, than just to hand that over to a developer that wants to potentially severely impact our communities. And I understand that these people are in our community anyway, but we're looking at concentrations, near sensitive receptors, and to me, it's a huge concern as a as a supervisor over some of these areas is how does that potentially impact my constituents? You know, SB 35 has already been something that's a challenge in my district where there have been SB 35 projects, 61 units on a 1-acre site, you know, in an area right next to 2 schools where traffic's already bad already. So, you know, I don't want to hand more control over. I don't want to incorporate some of these things into our county code that is not appropriate, you know, that we're giving up local control on these things by embracing some of these state laws that I think are really destructive for our communities.
Supervisor Hartman.
Yes. In broad strokes, I think that we've seen more and more state usurpation taking over of what had been a traditionally local land use authority. So I think all of us are not happy to see that, but I don't think there's any doubt. We'll see in the court cases, but so far, the state apparently has that right. So where I have difficulty is to target any particular mental illness, especially because I have relatives who have schizophrenia, and to target them and say, and it's well managed, and it can be well managed. So I think it's really unfortunate to target people with any kind of disease or affliction and say we can't have them in our neighborhood. That really strikes at my heart.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah, and I think what I said was just using that as an example of there, and that we do need to have more of these facilities. I think I've shown a willingness to support some of them. I was a champion for the Crestwood facility that we've put in there, and that's in the neighborhood as well. My problem is that means every place is a great place. We need to make sure that we do this thoughtfully, and for this to be done but just by right without having any input from us is a challenge. It could absolutely still be right spot. Supervisor Hartman, I didn't mean any disrespect to anybody like that. I've got mental health issues in my own family, so it's near and dear to my heart as well. So for those in this in that environment, I was just trying to use that as an example. There's some diagnoses that there are other additional concerns and conditions that need to be put in place to manage those things. You know, these things are by right. That still could be the right spot, but we might want to work on a CUP that has a management plan for how certain issues are going to be addressed in that community. We're not going to have those abilities anymore. It's not necessarily that they can't be there. It's just that we're going to lose the local control to be able to have that. And again, we can move beyond mental health, but there are other supportive services. There's people that come out with the out of the prison system, AB 109, into communities. And if we're not having those abilities into making sure that's the right place, that they're near services, I mean, that's really important too. We don't want to have these places, set up by right somewhere that would potentially be inconsistent with the other zonings, or not really even to provide good services, but maybe the land's cheap, so we'll go ahead and put it out there in Sisquoc, where they really are going to be, isolated from the services that they need. And so again, I'm not okay with making supportive housing a by right use. So I know that we may have to wrestle with a developer that's trying to, impose that on us through the state law, but I would rather have that fight than embrace this and put my name behind it today.
Well, I guess my take on that is I'm not embracing it, but I'm also realizing it's state law. So I think the reason why the state has come in and said, we're going to allow things like this by right is because the history of when we do try to, you bring up great points that we want to make sure we find the right spot. But as well as I do, when you try to find the right spot for supportive housing, this room's full of people like, yeah, I really love this idea. This isn't the right spot. And so this is what's driven the state to kind of take the ball away from us, and not just Santa Barbara County, everywhere. Rich counties, poor counties, northern, southern, it doesn't matter. Nobody wants, or the majority of people push back when supportive housing's planned for their neighborhood. So I would absolutely love to have the ability to put a CUP, or say you've got to have a security plan, or does this work out? But I think that votes, we have been usurped by the state on this. So I don't like it any more than you do. We'll continue to speak out on this, but I also, for me, I look at this as this is us matching up our codes with the actual state law. So I'm going to be supporting it. But Supervisor Hartman.
Yeah, just quick question about the objective standards. How much can we insert there?
Supervisor Hartman through the chair. So the objective standards, we did get a planning commission recommendation on them. So we would want to make sure that if you did have a change, that we didn't have to go back to them for anything. But these standards, I think, were slightly modified by input from members of each Board of Architectural Review to add a few little components to it. I think they improved it for the most part. But if I'm interested to hear if there's something, then I can assess whether or not that would be something we would have to return to the PC with.
I guess I didn't really focus on the objective standards. I did when we did them last Christmas but are they mainly design, or do they get to some of the issues that we're talking about here?
Supervisor Hartman through the chair. So objective standards include both the design standards, subjective design standards, as well as other objective development standards. So things like setbacks, height limits, parking requirements, et cetera. Those would sort of fall under our standard objective or our objective standards.
So
as opposed to establishing, we have not taken upon ourselves to establish new standards that would be applicable to these projects. And essentially, I think the way the state law reads and what our code reflects is that you can only apply standards to these projects that would be applicable to other multifamily housing in that zone. So you're sort of prevented from applying new standards that would not be applicable to other types of housing.
So you can't discriminate. So then my question is, if there is supportive housing, I assume there are other standards that apply for the care of people and the security, not through land use, but through other statutes.
Supervisor Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Lavanillo. I'd hope that we could take, if this does go ahead and move forward today, a second look at that with maybe county council's help on finding ways to wrestle a little bit more local control back on some of these potential conflicts that might happen. I understand this is by right, but again, not to have any ability is really, I think it's gonna be frustrating for us all. So, there's some places here where we can tighten this up to limit this. And I understand what Supervisor Lavanillo said, that, nobody wants it next to them. But our board has done some good projects, and we have got some things through. And we all kind of showed leadership up here to get our communities on board. The La Posada project with, Supervisor Capps and I, we went, we had a community meeting. Crestwood, we have had examples of bringing these into neighborhoods where we did have control. What's going to be really a lot of heartburn for me is to have no control over that. We eventually have to show that leadership and be brave to do the right thing, and this board has done that. I'm not looking for the state to usurp that from me, and so I'm, again, very frustrated by this whole concept.
I think we all are, but I also am not frustrated enough to strap on the gloves and fight the 800-pound gorilla for that. So, Supervisor Williams.
Yeah, I think it'd be just interesting to just have a review of I think 3 elements or two or three elements that are in these that we really have discretion over. I mean, one of the reasons why people elect us still in this day and age of acrimony and disbelief and is that we respect the law, right? That we're supposed to uphold the law whether or not we agree with the law. Can we just have that review? One is the year limitation, right? And I would argue this is a great opportunity to do something better, have a longer period of affordability. If we don't pass this, not only are we thumbing our nose at the law, but we're also reducing the protections for affordability. And then what are the other two?
Supervisor Williams for the chair. So we have it up on the slide here. For the supportive housing, the state law establishes up to 50 units that could be processed by right supportive housing. We had proposed going up to 75, but that is certainly somewhere where you as a board have discretion to cap it at the 50 units established by state law.
But the navigation centers are not in the realm of discretion.
That's a different category, and yeah.
Okay. No, I would argue that not only are we trying to be inclusive, we are also not trying to. It is also our responsibility to uphold the law.
Madam Clerk.
Oh, and I did also want to thank staff. There's a huge amount of work with the housing element, and so I just know the workload. I know the amount of time that you all have put into it, and just want to thank you for that.
Madam Clerk, do we have any requests to speak from the public?
Chair Levanino and members of the board, we have no requests to speak from the public on this item.
Okay. A motion? Items A, B, and C?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just to address the question that came up early about local discretion, the objective standards are really where you would look for what we want to apply locally for these types of projects. And so if in the future you wanted to relook at maybe adding additional objective standards, that's where I think you would look for local discretion.
Supervisor Nelson, you just ready to vote? Or
No,
are you looking at-
I did want to just say that maybe that we can give direction for staff to come back with some objective standards to give us some more local control on these things in the future. I mean, I'm not going to support it, but I think it would make it better for all of us to have those. So if they can go, we're not looking necessarily for an ordinance amendment at this point, but maybe a many of those things that we might be able to grab and ask to be included in the future.
CEO Miyasato.
Supervisor, through the chair, I just wanted to add a comment that just because these developments through the state law, which there's disagreement about, loss of local control, allows for by right placement, it doesn't mean by right to be a bad neighbor. And so we would have the normal tools that you do. That sometimes it's laborious and long, but the normal tools that we have in place if these housing developments and these uses, these people are bad, the developers, the occupants are bad neighbors, and we have the typical tools we would have. So I just want to remember that's always part of our power as a jurisdiction.
So can I get a motion with the Supervisor Nelson's recommendation in there as well?
So I would move A through C of the staff report today, and then come back at a future time looking at objective standards.
Okay.
I second.
Supervisor Capps seconds. So we have Supervisor Hartman with the motion, Supervisor Capps with the second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Passes 4-1. Thank you very much. Good job. We'll now recess to closed session. Will County Council please read the items for consideration today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The board in closed session is scheduled to consider one item. It's public employee appointment, reappointment for the Director of Public Works, and the time estimate is 1 hour.
Okay. Why don't we try to get back a little after noon? All right, we are reconvening the meeting of February 13th, 2024. Will County Council please report out from closed session?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The board met in closed session on one item, public employee appointment for Director of Public Works, and the board took no reportable action.
Okay, and with that, we're adjourned to Tuesday, February 27th, 2024, here in Santa Barbara, chaired by Supervisor Capps. Right on, looking forward to it.